Recording, and we are live.
Okay, Mr. Murillo, we're live.
Yes, we are live.
Okay. Well, we thank you, our community members, again for joining us to our the last forum of our series on use of force. We appreciate your willingness to join us on these Monday evenings. Uh, Again, just as a reminder of why we're doing this, the Berkeley Police Department policy requires a annual review of the use of force policy, and the Police Accountability Board will do it. Will convene a meeting with the police department to go over their policy. They have asked us, the board, earlier this year as part of their work plan for the Office of Director of Police Accountability to be able to support them in this endeavor. So I am Hansel Aguilar. I am the Director of Police Accountability. We have here our team from the Office of Director of Police Accountability that is going to be assisting and navigating us through this forum. We'll be monitoring. If you have any questions, you can drop it on the Q&A, and we'll be able to, if we need to provide any feedback in real time, we'll go ahead and do that. And if not, we'll go ahead. We have a public comment section that will occur later on in the uh, in the forum today. And this the agenda we have for tonight. We're gonna go do a recap of sessions 1 and 2. We're going to do an overview of tonight's forum, which is on community trust. We're going to do one incident review to look at what the reporting on critical incidents look like from the police department. We'll also review some reports and data. Some of the reports we'll review tonight, we haven't done them yet, but they're good opportunity to look at some of the narratives on where use of force may be utilized within the city of Berkeley and why. And again, we'll go over our transparency hub, and we'll also go into our police complaints portal that we launched earlier this year. We'll do some public comment sections, and then we'll finish out with some closing remarks. Okay. So if you joined us for this series, you recall in the first session a few weeks back, we discussed de-escalation and proportionality. And in session 2, we talked about accountability and transparency. We talked about some of the sections within the Berkeley police policy, use of force 300, where they talk about these different themes. Particularly for our first session, we looked at BPD use of force policy section 300.3.1. And this is where they discuss the factors used to determine the reasonableness, necessity, and proportionality of force. Now, a lot of this is governed by Supreme Court case law. There's also state law that requires the officers to behave and to utilize force when necessary, when reasonable, and in a matter that's proportionate to the event at hand and to the threat at hand. We also talked about 300.3.4, which discusses the de-escalation tactics that officers are trained on and that they can utilize when they're out on the field. There's a wide spectrum, and all of these different factors and decisions that the officers make, they're doing it with the totality of the circumstances. So they're considering the current threat that may be posed to them and other community members. They might be considering whether there's a difference in size between an officer and a community member, whether there's prior history between the parties, and whether they have knowledge about the potential threat of the individual. So there's a list of factors that officers consider when they're utilizing use of force, and that is what we do as an office when a community member comes to us and are dissatisfied and are concerned about the way an officer behaved, particularly when it came to use of force. We'll investigate all of the the situation at hand. We'll look at the body camera footage. We'll look at the police reports. We'll interview the officers, witnesses, the complainant, and we'll gather all the facts and we'll try to determine whether it was reasonable, necessary, and whether it was a proportionate use of force. And if there were any de-escalation tactics that could have been used and were not used, we'll point that out in our reports that then go to the Police Accountability Board and then to the Chief of Police. When there's a disagreement between the Police Accountability Board and the Chief of Police, there is an opportunity to also send the report onward to the city manager. If you recall session 2, if you attended, and again, these sessions are available on our website. We have the links also on our YouTube page. So if you missed it live, you can always go back and review these sessions. We did provide a lot of information. So it is a good resource for community members, and they want to dissect the policy. They have these resources available to them. But when we discuss accountability and transparency in our second session, we made a note that there's both internal mechanisms and external mechanisms to accountability and transparency. So within the police department, they have a lot of reporting requirements. The officer themselves needs to report the action depending on the level of force. We talked about the force, different levels that the BPD uses to categorize from level 1 all the way to level 4 being the most serious use of force, and what the supervisor responsibilities are under 300.6.1. We also talked about the public records and also the core principles in about respecting the dignity of individuals and ensuring that we're treating our community members in a respectful manner and resorting to use of force only when absolutely necessary. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Murillo, our policy analyst, who can go over some of the questions that we received in sessions 1 and 2 and where that information is available.
Thank you, Director Aguilar. Yes, we did receive a few questions throughout session 1 and session 2. The answers to those questions have been uploaded to our website. If you're following us through email, we also received those today, or we've sent those out a couple of times before today, so they're more than welcome to review them at the link on your screen or also under the notice for today's meeting. We have some information on the data. There's one particular question that was brought up a couple of times that was of interest to our community, which was in terms of just generally what percent of calls for service resulted in use of force, and of those, how many resulted in a formal complaint about either abuse of that use of force and so forth. It is a complicated topic, so we encourage you to read our response as well as provide us with any additional questions you might have. Next slide, please. Just to recap a few of the resources that we went through over the last 2 sessions and that would be important for this review as well as future reviews of this policy. We watched the video from California Post on AB 392. The video provides an overview of AB 392, which updates and modernizes the standards for officers' use of deadly force. We also went over through a Flexi Talk, specifically covering Graham v. Connor, which is one of the important Supreme Court cases related to use of force. In this case, it establishes that the use of force by law enforcement must be judged based on an objective reasonableness standard under the Fourth Amendment. And then, of course, we have the BPD's Transparency Hub. The Transparency Hub includes data and visuals on our calls for service, use of force usage, as well as other information collected as part of the California Racial and Identity Profiling Act, which is RIPA, or most commonly referred to as the STOP data, which keeps tracks of any stops or interactions between officers, vehicles, pedestrians, and cyclists. And of course, we have BPD Policy 300, which is the subject of our review, which sets forth the criteria governing the use of force in Berkeley. Next slide, please.
Before we advance, and we'll go over our BPD Transparency Hub. I did want to plug in that it has received a lot of recognition, both on a national level, but certainly regional level. And there is a book that was just written on the way that ArcGIS or geographic information system data is utilized. And there's a chapter devoted to Berkeley's Transparency Hub. I think it's a great resource in a way, an important way to showcase the value of something, a resource like this for community members. So this book is forthcoming. It'll be released within the next few weeks. It's called The Geography of Hope: Real Life Stories of Optimists Mapping a Better Future. So we'll link that information for individuals that may be interested in how on a case study of this transparency hub.
Thank you. And then again, another important resource, not just for this policy review, but if members of the public in our community are always interested in knowing what policies and training materials the BPD is receiving, Senate Bill 978 requires that all policy and training materials be made publicly available. And the whole purpose of this is to ensure further transparency so that the public can see how officers are being trained and the policies that they're expected to follow. So again, by following the link on the screen, you could find the BPD's complete policy manual as well as other training materials. And now I'll hand it back to Director Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Murillo. And so tonight we want to pivot to talking about how we build community trust and build community relationships and partnerships. There's no um, I think no surprise that in some communities, and historically, there have been a lot of concerns about how the police have engaged with the members of their respective communities. Even here, home at Berkeley, we have also had some disagreements in community policing and community relationships. And our role as an office and as a board is to try to build trust between the community and the police department. Now, as it pertains to use of force, there are some sections within the use of force policy that speak to this level of community trust and community relationships. We have section 300.1.3, section F, and also section G, which discuss this a little bit more. We're going to, again, if you have participated, you might be used to us reading verbatim. Tonight, it won't be any different, but these are a lot shorter sections. So we'll go ahead and read them quickly for you. So policy 300.1.3, section F, foster strong community relationships. It states the Berkeley Police Department understands that use of force, even if lawful and proper, can have a damaging effect on the public's perception of the department and the department's relationship with the community. The department is committed to fostering strong community relations by building on its historic tradition of progressive policing and ensuring accountability and transparency and striving to increase trust with our community. Again, these are very important um, words to put in a policy, but it's our role as community members, as an oversight board, to ensure that the department is living out its promise to being transparent with the community. We're going to review some videos today to see how some of this reporting is done from a critical incident perspective, but also discuss through our public comment section, if members want to engage, community members, about ways we could continue to improve our accountability and transparency as it relates to use of force within the police department. Section G of fair and unbiased policing, and there are several areas throughout the policy where this is codified. And there's policy 401, which is fair and impartial policing. But in this section of use of force, there is also a section on fair and unbiased policing. So members of the Berkeley Police Department shall carry out their duties, including the use of force, in a manner that is fair and unbiased in accordance with policy 401, fair and impartial policing. And there are very specific elements that policy 401 discusses how community members should be treated based on the different facets of their characteristics, whether they're a member of a protected group or just in general, people should be treated with dignity and respect. So these are things that are embodied in the different sections of the Berkeley Police Manual, but certainly within the use of force. There are a lot of perceptions and a lot of instances in complaints that our offices may be fielding where there might be a mixed match in the expectations and how the community members were treated. And it's our role to ensure that they're being held to the highest standards. If there's any deviation from the policies, then it's our role to include that in the report. Our legal threshold that we must meet and abide by in our reports is preponderance of the evidence. That is more likely than not that the event occurred or did not occur. So that is something that we take very seriously when we're doing our investigations. Mr. Murillo, I'm going to call you back so you can go over this incident review. Again, this is the second forum where we showed a video that might be graphic in nature. This is a officer involved shooting. We won't show you the shooting portion of this event. It is publicly available. What we are showing you is up to the point where the shooting occurs. The reason why we're doing this is to show you an example of what transparency can and should look like when there are critical incidents and community members want to know and have the right to know why something occurred, whether the official narrative that's been given out is accurate and it is consistent with what the video and the documentary evidence shows. So, Mr. Murillo, could you give us a little bit overview about why police departments, particularly the Berkeley Police Department, does these critical incident reviews?
Of course. Thank you, Director. So as the Director mentioned, for critical incident videos, state law actually requires that both the video and audio recordings associated with that event be made publicly available. That is through Assembly Bill number 748, which amends Section 6254 of the Government Code, which requires the release of audio and video recordings of incidents involving the discharge of a firearm by a peace officer or the use of force resulting in death or great bodily injury. A key definition here is that of a critical incident. A critical incident is defined as either an incident involving the discharge of a firearm, as I mentioned, or an incident in which the use of force by a peace officer or custodial officer, again, results in death and great bodily injury. And we can move on to the next slide, Director, unless you want to add anything else to AB 748.
Sure, and these are what we would categorize here in the city of Berkeley as level 4 events. In the past year, these are just taking a step back. These are relatively rare events in policing, certainly within the city of Berkeley, but within the 12-month period, we have experienced at least 2 of these events. One event, our office is not investigated. The other event, our office will be investigating once the proper criminal investigations that occur whenever an event like this happens are completed. Again, our office is a complaint-driven office, so we need community members to bring forth allegations of police misconduct for us to conduct our work.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so the critical incident video that we'll be reviewing today, that we're playing a snippet of, is an officer-involved shooting, as mentioned by the Director. This was at the Toyota in Berkeley at 1025 East Shore Highway, which occurred on September 21st, 2023. So it's a little bit over a year since that happened. So I'll now go ahead and share my screen so you could play the snippet. Okay. Director, if you could confirm in just a moment if you could hear the audio.
Hello, I'm Jessica Perry, Public Information Officer for the Berkeley Police Department.
We can hear
I'm
it.
here to talk about a critical incident that occurred in the city of Albany and involved Berkeley police officers. On September 21st, 2023, Berkeley and Albany Dispatch received reports of an active shooter at a car dealership on East Shore Highway. 24-year-old Lamar Walker of Vacaville entered the service center of the dealership and killed an employee, 24-year-old Alana Gallen. Police and fire from Berkeley and Albany immediately responded to the active shooter report. Berkeley police evacuated the business, and officers moved to the second floor of the service center and encountered Mr. Walker. He pointed a firearm in the officer's direction, and an officer-involved shooting occurred. In the interest of sharing as much information as possible with our community, we are releasing video along with 911 and dispatch audio. A warning, this content is disturbing and contains graphic material. Viewer discretion is advised.
Berkeley 911 505, where is your emergency? Hello?
Active shooter at Toyota Berkeley.
Where in Berkeley?
1025 East Shore Highway.
1025 East Shore. Someone is shooting people?
Yes, he's upstairs.
Okay. Okay, he fired some shots?
Get the doors in, get the doors in.
Sir, can you give me a description of this person?
Okay, 1036 1071, possible active shooter. It's going to be in Albany, but we're getting the call. 1025 East Shore, 1025 East Shore. We do have a GSW victim. We're calling Albany now. If we can get units to 1025 East Shore Highway, it's going to be in Albany.
I got a post on the north side of the building, just off of East Shore.
Guys, anything, let me know. I'm the manager over here. Okay?
All right, just walk back up that way. Get out of line of sight of the building.
I'm trying to. I think I got everybody out. Over to this right here.
So let's set up a rally point for all the
Get that way. Go that way.
victims or witnesses or employees south of this location.
Get out of line of sight of the building.
Just get my phone out of this phone.
South on East
Stay on
Shore,
this
out
side.
here.
Come on this side.
It's an open door.
Copy.
Put the suspects up. Give me some of the boxes.
Hey, Johnson, I'm posting.
Post?
I'm posting. Go.
Stay in the door. 10-9. 10-9.
Hey, hold this. Yep.
Voice in here. Where's the voice?
Hey, push up, push up.
Cross court, guys.
Push.
Okay, we'll now hand it back to the director whenever you're ready, Director Aguilar.
Yes, and we'll just go back. There's a few elements that we want to. We're not going to replay the video, but we're bringing it to your attention. For one, it is a requirement now by under state law to not exempt this kind of videos from public disclosure. So the police department um, disclosed and provided this video pursuant to the new changes in the state law. And there are several things that the department did here that is something that a lot of departments are doing, is to provide commentary either verbally, as you saw the PIO officer do in the beginning of the video, or throughout the video, put captions that explain it. They provided an overview of where geographically this incident occurred. They provided context that the 911 call that we heard to indicate that there was a officer involved, or excuse me, that there was an active shooter event going, and they provided more context throughout the video for the viewer to understand what was going on. There have been a lot of incidents that may have happened across the nation where we hear that an individual was shot and killed by the police, and we have no context. The purpose of these kind of these critical incident videos are to ensure that the police departments are being transparent and in a timely manner communicating what happened. There are instances, however, that depending on the event, there are investigations underway, and some of these videos and information may be withheld until some of the investigative tasks can be completed. And that is to ensure thoroughness and fairness in the process and ensure that it's not going to impact if there's any criminal investigation that needs to take place. So in this particular event, you see several BPD officers respond. They were providing assistance to the city of Albany in this event. Several officers were heavily armed, excuse me, not harmed, but heavily armed to respond to this active shooter event. And a lot of the active shooter events, they do call for this kind of response. A lot of the paradigm in these response has shifted throughout the years, where officers are responding to immediately contain the threat. So this is something that we are now seeing in the use of force, in particular in active shooter responses by police departments. That's why you saw the officers with the rifles. You saw several officers in tactical formation, and they were responding in a way that's consistent with their training to ensure that they're mitigating any harm. As you saw in the beginning, there were individuals that may have been there that were not actively involved in this event, and we want to make sure we uphold all life that may be present in these events, and limit any potentials for bystanders being casualties of any of these events if use of force and deadly use of force is required. I'll go ahead and bring back our PowerPoint presentation. Mr. Murillo, while I'm doing that, I don't know if you have any further commentary on this.
I do, and it comes in terms of the slide that we'll be doing just shortly. But one of the concepts, and I could start this before we go into the Transparency Hub, is that uses of force, again, are reported on the Transparency Hub, but the details that we get are limited. So for example, you might get the deployment of a rifle as a level 3 use of force, or whether a handgun or sidearm was pointed. We get that numerical data and the reason for why that use of force escalated, but we don't get a lot of the context. In this specific incident, as you may have noticed, the patrol rifles were deployed, and that's where a new element, next slide please, Director, a new element of reporting comes from in terms of use of force, which falls under, one more slide please.
I don't believe we covered this, though. Are you going to a different slide before we cover this, or?
Sorry, I'm actually jumping ahead if you want to go back to cover that portion of it before I go into my slide.
Yes. So we're still staying on this topic. Another element in another area where the law has changed is that officer-involved shooting investigations and reviews are now required on the state level by the Department of Justice in certain circumstances. This would not be one of those circumstances, but we're bringing it to your attention so community members are well aware again about these, not only the internal mechanisms for transparency and accountability, but at the state level, the external mechanisms that may be at play when an event as serious as a officer involved shooting occurs. So pursuant to California Assembly Bill 1506, AB 1506, the California Department of Justice is required to investigate all incidents of an officer involved shooting resulting in the death of an unarmed civilian in the state. If you go back to the video we just reviewed, this would not qualify for one of the incidents that would be investigated by the state because the individual was armed and there was an active shooter scenario. Now, historically, though, these critical incidents in California had been primarily handled by local law enforcement agencies and the state's 58 district attorneys. However, now signed into law on September 30th, 2020, and in effect on July 1st, 2021, AB 1506 provides the DOJ with an important tool to directly help build and maintain trust between law enforcement and the communities they create by creating a mandate for independent statewide prosecutor moving forward to investigate and review officer-involved shootings of unarmed civilians across California. When an officer-involved shooting occurs, transparent open communication is critical to maintain public trust. There is a video we're going to play shortly that goes over this new process, and also the website that the state maintains. They actually report out on these investigations that they do. So it is also an important tool for community members to be well informed about what occurs in these events when there's an unarmed civilian that was subjected to deadly use of force by a local law enforcement agency. Ms. Murillo, do you have that video ready?
Yes, I do. Just one moment. And if you could confirm that the audio is coming through.
Hi, I'm Rob Bonta, Attorney General
Audio's
of California. As California's Chief Law Enforcement Officer, my number one priority is improving and defending public safety. In order to do that, we have to build and maintain trust between our communities and law enforcement. That's something I'm deeply committed to. Under California Assembly Bill 1506, DOJ is required by law to serve as an independent statewide agency to investigate and review peace officer shootings that result in the death of an unarmed civilian. The law helps ensure there is a fair, thorough, and transparent process in place for handling these difficult incidents. By working cooperatively with California agencies, our offices can help generate trust. Trust that, in turn, helps create greater safety for our communities and officers. At DOJ, we'll continue to do our part to protect and secure the justice and safety that every Californian deserves. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Marsh, Chief of the Division of Law Enforcement here at the California Department of Justice. Our teams are on the ground every day working to protect the people of our state. As a part of the effort to support our office's work under AB 1506, we're hoping this video can answer frequently asked questions about our office's role and initial response to qualifying incidences. AB 1506 provides DOJ with an important tool to directly help build and maintain trust between law enforcement and the communities we serve by creating a mandate for an independent statewide agency to investigate and review officer-involved shootings resulting in the death of unarmed civilians across California. DOJ investigates and reviews all such incidences covered under AB 1506. Historically, these critical incidences in California had been primarily handled by local law enforcement agencies and the state's 58 district attorneys. For every qualifying event, DOJ, as soon as feasible and appropriate, disseminates relevant information and materials and ultimately makes public its determination regarding criminal liability for such incidences. Where criminal charges are not appropriate, DOJ prepares and makes public a written report communicating 4 key components: a statement of fact as revealed by the investigation, an analysis of those facts in light of applicable law, an explanation of why it was determined that criminal charges were not appropriate, and, where applicable, recommendations to modify policies and practices of involved law enforcement agencies. And now, on to our frequently asked questions. What counts as a qualifying event?
A qualifying event is an incident in which a California peace officer is involved in a shooting that results in the death of an unarmed civilian, a civilian who was not in possession of a deadly weapon. In officers, any California peace officer is defined under California Penal Code sections 830 to 832.19, which generally includes police officers and sheriff's deputies. A qualifying event requires the discharge of a firearm. This generally includes an officer's departmentally issued or personal handgun, rifle, or shotgun. Under AB 1506, a qualifying event would not include the deaths of unarmed citizens arising out of other encounters with officers, such as by use of less lethal devices or physical altercations. While most qualifying events involve officers who are on duty at the time of the incident, a qualifying event may also include an off-duty officer who was acting under the color of authority as an officer at the time of the incident. However, if the off-duty officer was not acting under color of authority, it would not qualify. Additionally, the law only applies to incidents that occurred after AB 1506 went into effect on July 1st, 2021. Additional information regarding definitions for qualifying events can be found online at oag.ca.gov/OIS-incidents.
What is the definition of an unarmed civilian?
An unarmed civilian is anyone who is not in possession of a deadly weapon. A civilian is in possession if the weapon is under the civilian's dominion and control at the time of the shooting. Possession usually requires that the weapon is available for use. Where a civilian attempts to take control of an officer's firearm, the civilian is not in possession until the officer loses control of the firearm. Examples of a deadly weapon include, but are not limited to, a firearm, switchblade knife, billy club, or brass knuckles. All firearms and BB or pellet guns that shoot metal projectiles, even if unloaded or inoperable, are deadly weapons. Objects that have a legitimate non-weapon purpose are considered deadly weapons only when, based on all the circumstances, they are actually being used in a manner likely to produce death or great bodily injury. Some examples of objects that have been considered a deadly weapon when used in that manner include knives, box cutters, screwdrivers, bottles, chains, rocks, razor blades, and iron bars. Replica firearms are not considered deadly weapons unless they are used in some particular manner likely to produce death or great bodily injury, for example, as a bludgeon. Vehicles can also be considered deadly weapons, but a vehicle in and of itself is not inherently a deadly weapon. A vehicle being driven at an officer or civilian with the apparent intent to cause death or serious bodily injury would be considered a deadly weapon. A vehicle that is not being driven in such a manner, for instance, if a vehicle is being used to escape, would not be considered a deadly weapon. When it comes to moving vehicles, making a determination about whether it qualifies as a deadly weapon can require extensive evaluation, and DOJ requests that law enforcement agencies notify our office for all moving vehicle incidents that result in the shooting death of an otherwise unarmed civilian by an officer.
Does the law only apply to state and local law enforcement? What about federal peace officers?
AB 1506 applies to California peace officers. Federal agents are not considered California peace officers. However, a California peace officer who is cross-designated as a federal agent is still a California peace officer. Where the other requirements are met, a shooting on federal property would still be investigated as a qualifying event if it involves a California peace officer. As standard practice, our office will continue to coordinate with other investigative authorities in such scenarios.
What should law enforcement do if they believe an incident might qualify for review?
DOJ generally relies on law enforcement agencies to report to our office when they believe an incident may qualify for review under AB 1506. If a law enforcement agency believes an incident may qualify, they should contact the Los Angeles Regional Criminal Information Clearinghouse, or LA Clear, regardless of the agency's geographical location. An LA Clear representative will provide the caller with contact information for DOJ's on-call personnel in the region. The reporting agency is then responsible for reaching out to the on-call personnel. Once the agency has connected with DOJ, a special agent supervisor will determine if further review is necessary as to whether the incident qualifies for an AB 1506 investigation based on a phone discussion with the law enforcement agency. If the special agent supervisor determines further review is necessary, the supervisor may conduct an in-person assessment or assign a special agent to respond to determine if an AB 1506 investigation is required. If so, the special agent in charge will be notified by the responding special agent supervisor, and additional resources will be deployed as needed. Once a qualifying incident is confirmed, the special agent supervisor will coordinate the responders either directly to the main scene, a secondary scene, the medical facility, or other locations as needed to conduct the respective investigative functions and ensure the efficient utilization of personnel and time. The specific details of the incident will dictate the appropriate allocation of departmental resources. The involved law enforcement agency should not stop its investigation and wait for the arrival of special agents. Once DOJ personnel arrive on scene, they will set up a briefing with the agency of jurisdiction and start the process for conducting a cooperative investigation. The department understands that pausing an investigation may not be appropriate or feasible, taking into consideration various factors, for example, potential loss of evidence, loss of witnesses, security of the scene, weather conditions, or possible civil unrest. That said, if a critical part of the investigation is about to occur and the deployed DOJ team is pending arrival on scene, the decision to pause or proceed with the investigation should be made through cooperative discussions between DOJ and the involved agency.
What happens if law enforcement agencies don't realize it may be a qualifying event until much later?
DOJ always stands ready to review additional information about an incident at any time if it is potentially relevant to the department's assessment as to whether an incident is a qualifying event. If it is not determined that a qualifying incident occurred until well after the initial investigation has concluded, special agents will work cooperatively with the involved agency to obtain and review all evidence, videos, statements, reports, and anything relating to the incident to evaluate the investigation in its entirety and proceed with the investigation as needed. Agents will ensure the investigation was conducted comprehensively, thoroughly, accurately, and in a manner that minimizes bias or a conflict of interest.
Will DOJ handle the investigation into any potential underlying crimes?
The investigation of any underlying crime will remain with the agency of jurisdiction. As an example, If a police department responds to a robbery in progress at a local convenience store and one of the officers shoots an unarmed civilian that results in that civilian's death, the local agency will handle the robbery investigation, while DOJ personnel will handle the officer-involved shooting incident. DOJ recognizes that there may be overlap in some cases where the underlying crime and the officer-involved shooting are so closely linked that they cannot be separated.
What office is the primary point of contact for the decedent's family?
DOJ operates a Victim Services Unit known as VSU within the Office of Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement. VSU has established protocols and trained advocates who act as family liaisons and provide support, information, resources, and assistance to a decedent's family at every stage of the investigative process. VSU family liaisons provide information to the decedent's family about their rights and how to seek assistance from other state agencies and local community-based organizations. Within 48 hours of receiving the decedent's family's contact information, a VSU family liaison will take the steps to provide emotional support, orientation to the criminal justice system, information on the status of the investigation, crisis intervention, and other services to the decedent's family based on their specific needs.
What office is the primary point of contact for media communications? What about the release of video footage or personnel records?
Media inquiries regarding the officer-involved shooting investigation should be referred to DOJ's press office. Early on in the investigation, the department's press office will connect with the involved agency's public information officer to coordinate any press interactions. DOJ requests that any media releases by the agency of jurisdiction be discussed with the department's special agents prior to release. The purpose of this collaboration is to minimize any negative impacts to the criminal investigation that may potentially result. However, consistent with any existing procedures or community expectations, involved agencies are encouraged to provide general information regarding the incident in its immediate aftermath, as well as ensure that the release of video footage is in line with the requirements of AB 748.
What does DOJ Bureau of Forensic Services do when responding to a qualifying event?
The Bureau of Forensic Services, known as BFS, is the scientific arm of DOJ. The Bureau is a full-service accredited forensic laboratory system consisting of 10 regional laboratories and specialized programs, including the statewide DNA Databank program. Our forensic scientists provide field and laboratory support to DOJ's police shooting investigation team by responding to qualifying events to assist with scene evaluation, evidence documentation and processing, and analysis of evidence, including firearms, DNA, digital evidence, and latent prints. Additional information regarding BFS is available online at oag.ca.gov/BFS.
Thank you for taking the time to learn about the work we lead at DOJ to build trust between communities and law enforcement. DOJ remains committed to conducting fair, thorough, and independent investigations into police shootings that result in the death of unarmed civilians in California. Making sure the public and law enforcement agencies understand our role and have clear information about the process is a critical part of ensuring the effectiveness of our work under the law. For more information, please visit oag.ca.gov/OIS-incidents. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Murillo is going to get that website so we could get our community members acquainted with it. But I'll just make some brief remarks. Again, the officer-involved shooting scenario is a statistically rare event. However, it is an event that can occur and in some circumstances may be justified. In the city of Berkeley, within the last 12 months, we have experienced at least 2 of these scenarios where they have resulted in the death of individuals. Our office, we don't automatically initiate investigations. We are a complaint-driven agency, so we do have to have a complaint. As noted in this video, there are other mechanisms. So that may be at play for accountability and ensuring that these events are being thoroughly investigated as they should. So through this law, the state does the reviews and investigations of officer-involved shootings where a civilian is unarmed and it results in a death. So that's something, again, that we want community members to be aware of. This is the website that was referenced at the end of the video, and this is where community members can find that video we just played, but also if find information about cases that may be publicly known, and all these events are publicly known because of the transparency. Mr. Moody, if you can go ahead and go to current cases just so we can get our community members acquainted with that. So you'll see this information, the status, the name of the decedent, the name of the agency involved in the officer involved shooting, and the DOJ case number. And so it's a lot of information. When they do complete it, again, there's public reporting that they have. If you can find a one of these incidents, Mr. Murillo, that where there is a report available, so we can just showcase what community members may expect. Perhaps it's in the case archives. Okay. So taking a little time to load, but again, as the video indicated, we should be seeing 4 things in these reports. And these are the format that community members can be accustomed to when when there's an officer involved shooting that's being investigated by the Department of Justice of California. Okay, and these reports again are publicly available for community members. We'll go ahead and return back to our agenda, Mr. Murillo. So we are going to go into a review activity where we're going to look at several different sources of information. First up is the BPD Transparency Hub, and we have been going over this hub in the last 2 sessions. So we'll just do a gentle overview for our community members to be familiar with where to access it and what the data that they can expect to see in the Transparency Hub.
Thank you, Director Aguilar. Just one moment. Okay. Okay, perfect. So again, the Berkeley Transparency Hub offers us a lot of data. As I was mentioning earlier when I was getting ahead of myself, there is a lot of useful information here in terms of the numerical instances that certain uses of forces are implemented in different incidents. As we've covered previously, not only is this mapped out as to where these incidents are taking place, but we could also filter it by the date range, the role of the subject, so whether it was, again, if they're arrested, if they're an involved party, so forth, as well as filtering it down by the different levels of force and the reason of the force. So if there was, for example, if we go down here, we know that for the period between August 27th, 2023 to September 1st, 2024, there was 10 total incidents of level 3 uses of force. What the data will tell you, apart from giving you the actual numerical number, is that I'll also break it down to you by the subject's race and by the percentage of force used. Again, I currently have it filtered out for level 3 use of force, and that'll be relevant in the next portion of this review session. Again, we could filter it by the level of force. Again, we're only looking at level 3, but if we were looking at all levels, we would see the different numbers for each type. We see the most common uses of force, in this case is level 3. A handgun or sidearm was pointed, and the primary reason of that was for effecting an arrest, followed by fleeing, brandishing a weapon, and clearing a structure. So the reason I bring this up, and what I was getting at earlier in the video, is that whenever law enforcement use different levels of force, we don't always get the full context within the BPD transparency portal. Again, what we can get from here is the level and the type of force and the reason for the force, but we don't necessarily get the context as to why they were effecting an arrest or how did this person start, how did this individual, why did they flee? So we don't have that for everything, but for certain uses of force, for example, the patrol rifle that we saw earlier on in the Berkeley Toyota incident that happened last year, we saw multiple officers with patrol rifles deployed. Why is that relevant? So, as some of you may be aware, and for those of you who are not, there's a state requirement for law enforcement agencies to report on military equipment. That is Assembly Bill 481. It requires all law enforcement agencies to essentially report whenever they deploy a patrol rifle or whenever they use equipment like that. Military equipment covers everything from 38-inch batons all the way to less than lethal projectiles in their specific case here within the city of Berkeley. So there's two reporting mechanisms where we can get that additional context. Here in Berkeley, we have the community safety ordinance. It's another version of the military equipment report, which some of you may be familiar with. This one gets reported to the state. This one's reported to council. Our version of our ordinance actually requires additional reporting beyond what's required by the state. Not only do we track the instances where it was used, but also where it was deployed. And here on my screen, just making sure everybody can still see that, are the different aspects or are the different equipment that we report on. So we have less than lethal munitions, the patrol rifle, and so forth. But what we wanted to show you here is that during these incidents, they are tracked in terms of that additional context. It's not specifically, it's not very detailed, but it's more than what the current transparency portal can provide, but it just gives a bit of more context as to what situations officers are deploying or using this equipment in. So for example, in this first entry, whenever you're observing the community safety ordinance report, for the equipment report, you would see colors in either this bright yellow or the standard table format. So anything that's in yellow is actually an instance where the equipment was used. In this case, we see that a patrol rifle was deployed and a 40-millimeter launcher was used, which is one of the equipment that the Berkeley PD has for less than lethal equipment. So we have the context here, as well as the beat. As well as the B in the city that where it was used. Part of transparency is that we could break it down, I believe, by beat, which can't readily track right now, but it's one of the options for us to be able to view the beats. And again, it gives you that additional context. So for this particular, the summary of the deployment is officers responded to a disturbance call from a neighbor. Officers knew the subject that they were going to contact had felony warrants for his arrest for firearm violations. Additionally, officers had previously recovered a bulletproof vest during a visit to his apartment. And on another day, the subject had barricaded himself in his apartment when the officers attempted to contact him. On this night, officers contacted the subject to shine the flashlight in an officer's eyes, blinding the officer on purpose. The subject had a power drill and refused multiple requests and orders for him to put the power drill down. Patrol rifles and 40-millimeter launchers were deployed. A trained negotiator took over communication with the subject and utilized de-escalation techniques. The subject placed the power drill down, but lifted his jacket to reveal a 7-inch fixed blade dagger on his belt. The subject was agitated, verbally aggressive, and cursed at officers. He was also incoherent and rambled about telepathy. The subject needed to be detained before the situation became any more dangerous. Officers launched 40-millimeter rounds at the subject. Other officers grabbed the subject before he could go for the dagger. The subject was immediately provided medical attention. He was arrested for the warrants and for violating an elder abuse restraining order by being at that apartment. So again, this specific instance provides us with the context as to why a patrol rifle might have been deployed, as well as the less than lethal, as well as the other options that they had in that circumstance. Director Aguilar, would you like to add anything else to this portion?
Yes, thank you for tapping me in. One of the things that we want community members to know, again, our theme of accountability, there's internal and external accountability. For this particular report, there is a level of oversight that's provided by the Police Accountability Board. So written into this ordinance, it requires the report to go to the Police Accountability Board before it goes to council. We're in a new iteration of civilian oversight in the city, although oversight is not new to us since being established in 1973. But through Measure II, we are now in the new stage or phase of civilian oversight. So our Police Accountability Board, which consists of community members that are appointed by council, they get the opportunity to engage with some of this work being completed by the police department. And their role when it comes to this particular report is to ensure that it is meeting the standards that are required under our ordinance. One of the things that we have brought to the attention of the body, because we also engage and provide professional services to our board, is that while at face value, some of these events may seem justifiable, there still needs to be some level of corroboration or review of the evidence. So when we're reviewing these reports, and we have brought this up to council and to the Berkeley Police Department and the Berkeley Police Accountability Board, we're actually not reviewing the body-worn camera footage or the police reports. So we're basing our analysis based on these summary reports. Now, if you've been following our last two sessions in the series, we did a lot of extensive discussion about proportionality and de-escalation and totality of circumstances, what makes a reasonable response and whether use of force is appropriate. In this particular event, I think objectively speaking, we can't say that it has met a lot of the standards for being an appropriate use of force. Again, it's very difficult to assess a situation simply by its written narrative and not reviewing other corroborating information. So that is something that we will continue to flag so we can do more robust analysis of these events, because these are very serious events that do require the level of scrutiny that it deserves. Now, if you read this particular narrative and a lot of the narratives where the equipment was used or deployed, the officers did what can be a commendable job in terms of de-escalation. But again, if we're speaking about accountability and transparency, it is important that we do have access to the corroborating exhibits to ensure that what we're reading here was consistent with what's in the body-worn camera footage and the police reports. So I'll stop there, Mr. Murillo. Oh, I'm sorry. And actually, one last quick thing. We also did note that the Berkeley Police Department should consider adding some of this information into the Transparency Hub. Again, the Transparency Hub is getting a lot of traction across not only the state, but across the nation. And it's being highlighted in a book that's forthcoming on geographic information systems. And it might be a good use of that Transparency Hub to utilize what's called the story maps feature and map out some of these events so community members don't have to be looking around different resources to kind of get a fuller picture of what use of force looks like in the community. Because right now you go to the use of force Transparency Hub, again, you look at the quantitative statistical data, but then the police reports or the equipment reports may be in a different portion. You have the critical incident reports where applicable or put in on YouTube. So it's a matter of connecting these systems so our community members that are engaged and that want to know more about these interactions can have a hub that houses this important information and not looking at different resources and links.
Thank you, Director. With that, I actually think we can proceed to the next slide. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
Well, one quick note, Mr. Murillo, we were going to just drop a note about the recently released workload organizational study of the police department. So while you're bringing that up, I'll just make a note of it. The city of Berkeley hired an organization, Citygate, which provided a review of the workload within the Berkeley Police Department and made several recommendations about how to improve and maximize resources and where necessary to acquire additional resources, both in human personnel, but also in physical assets and resources the department may be needing. There is some consideration for use of force and use of force reporting. We're bringing that forth to your attention. This report was just put out recently, so I know community members are still consuming this report. It's 155 pages. Our office has taken a preliminary review. I know our board members are actively reviewing this, and we do have a board meeting this Wednesday where we'll have a round 2 discussion of what's in this report. The chief of police has requested that we provide any feedback or questions for when this report is presented to the city council. So what Mr. Murillo is highlighting here is one of the notations they made on use of force. It says, given the number of reported level 1 use of forces in Berkeley, in which a subject did not experience more than temporary discomfort, Citygate recommends the city and department modify use of force reporting requirements to those more in line with the policies of the cities of Fremont, Hayward, Richmond, San Leandro, and Santa Clara, whose Lexipol created policies comply with both state and federal law. Again, these are recommendations that are being brought forth by Citygate. The city council will be reviewing some of these recommendations. Through this use of force review, community members can also engage with the board and see if that's a viable and an appropriate recommendation, or if they want to advise against it. We did have at our last board meeting a preliminary discussion on that. One of the board members was particularly interested in the concept of changing reporting requirements. We had a representative from the BPD who made remarks about what this looks like in practice. Again, we've been discussing the policies, but absent or void necessarily of what they look like in practice, to some extent what the administrative burden may or may not be when it comes to reporting requirements.
Thank you, Director Aguilar. And can you put up the PowerPoint, please?
Sure.
Perfect. And I believe we should be on slide 17. Yes. Thank you, Director. For this particular slide, again, we wanted to provide the different avenues where we covered, where a lot of the use of force information that community members might be interested in will be stored. Of course, we have the BP Transparency Hub, but as it's come up in our previous sessions, one of the aspects that community members are often interested about is when is the use of force when is it misused, and how many complaints are coming in through our oversight system or to the BPD regarding excessive or inappropriate use of force. Again, on our portal, we recently launched the civil platform, which would allow us to, one, track the complaints by allegation, as well as receive any feedback if you'd like to submit a policy complaint about, or not just specifically the policy, but any practices and procedures that you may observe in your day-to-day activity. We could certainly receive those through our portal if there are any personnel complaints. Again, as the director has mentioned, we're a complaint-driven organization. If there's ever concerns, not only could you file with us, but the Berkeley Police Department also has their own form. Or on the contrary, if there's ever an instance where proper de-escalation was used in an instance where one might have assumed that force could have been used, we always do have our complement form as well to submit any commendations to that regard. And I'll hand it back to the director for any additional comments on this section.
No, we're still in the early stages. You may have heard when we go out in community engagement meetings, we'll bring it up. We do want to get more engagement with this. We wanted to streamline the process for our community members. So we are actively promoting this specific portal for community members, and again, promoting transparency here. We are required annually to report out on our complaints, but there's no prohibition from us doing that in real time. So you'll get that information as soon as we get the complaint. It'll be posted in our portal, in our data hub as well. So now we'll go ahead and just reflect back on this use of force forum series. Again, the purpose here was to introduce community members and bring them in our process of this review. The Berkeley Police Department policy of use of force 300, it requires an annual review in a joint meeting with the Police Accountability Board. So that meeting is still to be held. The board has asked us to do a preliminary review and give some feedback and information. We wanted through these forums to provide a review, public review of the different elements of the policies. We've split them up in different themes or topics within the policy. We're actively requesting feedback. We have distributed surveys. And even if you don't submit it to us, once we finalize our preliminary report of this policy, we'll go ahead and give it to the board, who at a public meeting will go over it. You have the opportunity to then still provide more feedback, make opinions and recommendations on our report. But the purpose here, our stated purpose in our charter, is to improve community relations. Use of force being one of the most pivotal sort of interactions and authorities that were given. Police officers require some significant scrutiny and overview and thorough assessment of these actions. So we've been trying to foster strong community relationships through these forums, but also by closely examining the policy. We want to point out that any policy isn't perfect. And if there are areas or gaps that need to be reviewed, then it is important for community members to engage with us, with our office, with the Police Accountability Board, with the Berkeley Police Department directly, and or City Council. We want to ensure that we have the police department that reflects the community values. We have discussed that there's a lot of transparency and accountability mechanisms, both internally, whether it be the Internal Affairs Department and supervisors. We talked about the culture change and the dynamics that are at play in these social interactions internally. The police department is actively going through what's called ABLE training, which is the active bystander for law enforcement training. If you're interested in learning more about that, please watch our second forum and or come to our next Police Accountability Board meeting, which is on this Wednesday, September 25th at 6:30 p.m. We're going to have Deputy Chief Tate and or representative from the department to give us an overview about that training, so community members are more aware about how we're changing culture, how we're discussing these things beyond just putting it in policy. So again, the purpose of these forums were to explore ways that the BPD and the city of Berkeley can make improvements to our systems at place. And so we're always open to the feedback. It doesn't have to be as formal through a meeting. Feel free to shoot us an email. We'll have our contact information at the end here. But as we did in the other forums, we want to provide a space for our community members if they have any comments tonight. I'm not sure if we received any questions that we haven't answered, but I do want to provide the space now, Mr. Murillo. If you could queue up our public comments and or read any questions that maybe have been submitted through tonight.
Okay, we don't have any questions submitted, but for our participants who are joining us on Zoom, would anyone like to provide public comment or provide us with any feedback? Please use the raise hand icon so that we can address you if you'd like to provide public comment. I saw a hand go up. Okay, there we go. So I'll go ahead. This individual is under the name of Moni's iPhone. You have been granted permission to speak. You just need to unmute yourself.
Oh, good evening. Thank you, just real briefly, I wanted to point to a letter that I just sent by email, and I don't know if it went to the entire board or just the director, and to some community members. Just a few thoughts on the use of force issue. I was part of a case in December of 26. Well, it was a long time ago, 5 years ago. It seems like yesterday sometimes, but as a result, we have the body-worn cameras that was a part of the settlement in federal court. So I expressed a few concerns in my letter that I just sent, and I don't want to take up a lot of time. But I am concerned about the increased militarization of the police instead of the de-escalation of the physical force use. Of course, there are times when those incidents that were shown earlier, but I'm also concerned about peaceful protests that occur. And what type of actions is the department doing with regard to ensuring that we don't escalate violence as occurred 5 years ago in the Black Lives Matter when they tear gassed and bashed and flashbang thrown at us and various things of that nature. If you can address that question, is there anything that's in the policy that's with respect to de-escalation and how to respond during social justice protests and street marches? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And before you queue up, I do want to acknowledge that we appreciate that commentary. As part of this use of force review, we have also received a policy complaint and some video footage regarding one particular interaction where there was a public protesting involved, and officers they have displayed less than lethal. And so our analysis, when we provide this use of force report to the board, will also address that particular incident. I can tell you my experience with use of force, with police civilian oversight and policing in general. These are very important circumstances that need to be examined carefully and systematically. In my experience, I've served as an investigator in the DC Office of Police Complaints, and in that oversight body, we had the express task under our enabling legislation to do First Amendment monitoring. And our agency was actively out on the streets where we reviewed the interactions between the police officers and the community members. Because of our strained resources, and DC being a city that's very actively that's very politically active, we weren't out at every event, but we were at high profile events like the Women's March. We were at the inauguration of then President Trump, where we saw a lot of indiscriminate use of force on the protesters. And our review and our reports was actually used in some of the lawsuits that came afterwards. So I just want to make that note as a civilian oversight field. This is something that is also important for us to engage in. We will, you have my commitment that our report will address some of the events that have been brought to our attention. And we want to make sure that the policies are appropriately addressed in these scenarios, and where possible, we're given recommendations. I do also want to thank you for your involvement in ensuring that we have body-worn camera in the city of Berkeley. This is something that's very important in policing. I've followed this issue closely. There's still communities across the U.S. that don't have police body-worn cameras. I had the opportunity with our policy analysts and some members of the police department last year to go to a summit that was put forth by PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, where they did a 10-year review of body-worn cameras and the policies and where we are after 10 years of actively having body-worn cameras. I do want to say that it's a very underutilized tool in law enforcement for being able to do oversight. Most body-worn camera footage is not being reviewed by the mere nature of the amount of hours and when we have an incident like the one we showed today, there were many officers involved. Those were hours worth of body-worn camera footage. That particular incident would require individuals to look at it. But a lot of the footage is not being reviewed, and that's something that is known in public safety. There are a lot of tools that are emerging that may or may not be good solutions outside of a human review. There are some vendors that are looking at AI incorporation of video analysis, and these might be good solutions. Again, we also should be concerned about what these potential technologies can do and how they can promote and or increase potential social biases. So we have to, any technology we adopt, we have to do it with a careful lens. But again, I appreciate the question. We have not yet seen the particular the email that was referenced, but we'll look at it. We'll ensure that we provide it to the board, and if applicable, include in our report.
Thank you. And I do just want to quickly address another part that came up in that comment in terms of First Amendment assemblies and use of force during those specific events. So the Berkeley Police Department under policy 428, First Amendment assemblies, specifically 428.4, has additional information on use of force during those specific events. So we'll go ahead and link that, but again, it's policy 428.4 on the Berkeley PD's policy manual. Okay, and Director, I don't see any additional raised hands, but now we have two questions. I believe you could see them on your end. We could address them in the order. Well, they both came in at the same time.
Sure. You want to go ahead and read it, and then I'll go ahead and address them?
Of course. So the first question is, what support do you need from the community to be able to provide more BPD accountability? What can we do to help you do your job?
We appreciate that question. Again, I referenced earlier, we're in a new iteration of oversight in the city of Berkeley. Oversight is not new. We have one of the oldest continuous investigative models in the country. But in the new charter amendment, where the board was given additional duties and the office emerged, there are gaps in terms of where these resources are provided. And one of the things we want to ensure is that we're doing quality work as the community demands and expects, and also the board as well. We want to make sure that we're providing robust analyses for these policies. So we have received budget allocations for both a data analysis, a policy analyst. We got council support to go from one investigator to two investigators. We have an administrative analyst. So we're getting some support in some areas, but there's still a lot of ways where the charter is not being able to fully be envisioned because of resource constraints, but also because we're still institutionalizing what the charter amendment requires. We did, and that we have been public about our sort of obstacles in gaining some of this information. We need to do our work. We had some issues with the downtown task force policy review. That report has been completed. It is on our website. It is going to be going to council. Right now, if you're following these council meetings, it was at the Agenda and Rules Committee and now has been referred to the Public Safety Committee of Council. So if we ask for your support and engaging with our council members to ensure that they are listening and assessing and critically reviewing the policies that are coming forth by the board. They are putting forth some strong policies that can impact not only our community here, but the whole state. So we encourage you to review that report. Our other policies, again, in that particular case study of the downtown task force, body-worn camera was part of the discussion or access to it. And unfortunately, we fell short of our being able to fulfill our promise in that particular element because there was a delay in getting that video in our hands in those videos. But we do believe that they hold very important value when we're doing close examination of these events. So we ask our community members, and we're getting better at doing more public communications when we have reports out, but we just ask community members to engage with the work that we're doing. We're not above accountability, so please feel free to bring stuff that you feel we can be doing better so we can continue to improve our services to the community.
And there was a follow-up question to that. And I believe we did briefly touch upon this. But regarding, again, the downtown task force allegations, did we get the data that was requested for the investigation of
So
those allegations?
we made notes of where we had obstacles to getting the data. There is some information that some of the text messages, we'll leave it up to the community members to make that assessment. One of a former board members had made the case that it doesn't seem consistent that all of the text messages were provided to our body. We don't have any way to independently corroborate that, but there appears to be some sort of a gap between the messages that were initially requested and the messages that we ultimately received. So community members could engage with that report and make their own, draw their own conclusions there.
Okay. And then our last question, can you also answer whether our department took up training on responding to white supremacist group known as #1 threat to domestic safety? Proud Boys have faced off with us here, and they come to attack us violently.
And then again, a very important question, timely question. Part of our annual reporting does require us to speak to the training. We put out the triennial report earlier this year. That was one area where we didn't have the resources to be able to do appropriately. But in this forthcoming report that will be put out, we will do a closer examination on the training that's being done at the department. I can't necessarily speak to any specific training at this juncture, but it's certainly something that is important. Again, as mentioned in the comment, it is a threat to public and domestic safety, having that nexus within law enforcement of white supremacy. If you know my background, you know that prior to taking my role at the city of Berkeley, I was at the city of Charlottesville, Virginia, where there was the Unite the Right rally, and there's still a lot of review that's being done, and there were officers that not necessarily from the city of Charlottesville that were involved as some of the protesters there engaging in those rallies, but there were officers that came in from all different jurisdictions that went to participate at that rally. So this is absolutely a critical piece of information to be reviewing. Post does have requirements to assess and train on these bias issues. So again, this is something that we're going to be looking at closely when we put our annual report this year.
Okay, and I don't see any additional questions. But again, if there's anybody else that'd like to provide verbal public comment, now is the time.
Okay.
It does not look like we have any additional hands, Director.
Great. So again, this is about us, the Police Accountability Board. Current members are the name of our staff. Again, a shout out to our summer intern, Chloe Park, who really helped us set the stage and put these forums together. So we appreciate her work. We also, I promised you that I was going to provide the contact information. So please feel free to engage with us, not only at board meetings. There's our email, drop by into our office. That's our former address. We are physically located in a temporary location, but we can still receive mail there. We're on 2020 Melvia. We are expected to go to our permanent location. We're going to be inviting community members here. We're excited about that. We're trying to make it a place where community members can come and engage with us on these important topics. But as we close tonight in this series, it's important that we really take a moment to reflect on what we've been accomplishing as a city. I know that there's a lot of close and difficult conversations that we're having on public safety in the city of Berkeley. There are a lot of important emphasis on harm reduction, on reimagining public safety, and it is important to continue this work to not only just put forth initiatives and put forth policies, but ensure that we're actually following through on these promises to community members. So we continue to invite you to engage with us so we can improve these relationships. Today, we discussed not only policies and procedure, but also the human impact of these policies. We saw a video about the officer involved shooting, and we expect and should have that level of transparency for all uses of force. And that's something you as community members can continue to engage and demand from your police department and the city of Berkeley. But again, we emphasize this at the end of every forum. The conversation doesn't end here. This is only the beginning of a broader dialogue. And every year, we're going to have a use of force policy review. We're going to continue to scrutinize it to make sure it's reflecting best practices and effective practices across law enforcement. So we encourage everyone remain engaged. Your voice is critical here, not just in forums like this, but our day-to-day work. Please feel free to reach out to us. And on the behalf of the Office of Director of Police Accountability and the Police Accountability Board, I want to thank each of you tonight for participating and your commitment to making this community a place where everyone feels safe and respected. So thank you and have a great night.